Hello there, and welcome to episode 6 of my quick tutorial series for Mind Over Magic. In this episode, I'm going to talk about organization and things that you can do to automate things in a way that helps you out to get things done. Because in this game, you get to manage eventually a really big bunch of wacky old crazy mages. Therefore, you better know your tools, and that's what this episode is going to be about. If you're new to this, there's a playlist link down below in the description box, very first up thing, which leads you to the entirety of the playlist of my quick tutorial series where I go over all the things in this game. So, we're going to go over various tools today that allow you to automate business in this game. I don't know where to start, so we're going to dip in at the very first thing that comes to my mind. So first up, when you have planters, that's one of the things that I want to get started with first. In the outdoor section, basically all of these fellas here, they automatically produce things for you, which is amazing. But you really ought to do a harvest limit there. Because, you don't need 10,000 gut berries. But if you don't go for a harvest limit, eventually you'll have that. Here's one caveat about it. The thing is, every planter has its own harvest limit. Yeah, you need to put that up onto every single one. But luckily, you can build a copy with the settings. So I strongly recommend always build one planter, configure it with the harvest limits that you want to, and then just keep copying that one. That's the easiest way to handle these things, because some things you need more of, some things you need less of, but, well, think well about your first harvest limit. If you ever happen to accidentally want something new, you can here copy the settings and paste them then onto existing ones. So if you suddenly decide that you need 500 instead of 100, you can configure it on one fella and then paste it on the others via drag and drop selecting them. It's a necessary evil, and you ought to know it, otherwise it'll bite your back. So, next step on my list, the priority list. So, this one is your managing tool to make sure who does what and when. So, the table here gets worked off from left to right. So that means the priorities here are defining whether or not things are to be done. So the internal logic is, first the game checks, is there anything on emergency? And if yes, I'm going to do that immediately. That's something that brings people out of their bed and they're doing it all of a sudden at once. Then it checks is anything on top priority, and then it goes from here to there, and if it finds any task that matches the description here, mage will go and do that thing. And then after all these priorities are dealt, it's going to do the same thing until it finds a task, and so on and so forth. So that's the internal logic. I just wanted to explain it real quick. This way, I like to go here now to assign things to people who are really good at it. So here you need to go for your experiences. One thing that I do know to do for sure, put medical rest and teaching on the top priority here, because you never want your students not to be taught anything, and you never want your folks to be running around wounded until they have a breakdown. Down here, we can configure which settings should be applied to any new hire. This is also quite useful, as this means we can assign every new staff to these priorities. Teaching is something where I gotta say, sometimes, for example, your researcher can have a lower priority on teaching, or your cook, or a crafter, whatever. You can always change these things, but having everybody on a high priority on teaching will result in at least one teacher being always there for the students, which is very important. After that, with a standard setting, things will get done somehow. They always will. Personally recommend to have your researcher on a high research priority and somebody on a high hauling, repair, and cleaning priority. Also, warding is very important once you have something that requires these charges. Everything else is a game of finding out what's working good for you. Seriously, people would tell you here what's the best way or the worst way or whatnot, when I gotta say, All you need to do is start to understand these things and then keep it handy as a tool which allows you to do things. For example, when a really bad monster spawns on the map, what I love to do is put hunting on top priority for everybody, just like that, and then issue a hunting order. Everybody stands up and gets that monster down that tries to kill somebody. These are tools that you can use, and don't see this as something that is set in stone. It's my personal recommendation about that. The schedule here is also a very important thing. In the schedule menu, we get to select when people sleep, eat, recreate, do tasks, and do classes. Here, one very, very important thing. Put a recreation thing right there, and then they get to eat a little bit more, and then you can select for yourself how you want to distribute, how much teaching or how much everything else you want to do. If you don't put these recreation hours in there, they're not going to recreate at all, and they're going to grow really, really ill-mooded. What you gotta do too, of course, is put up an enchantophone as well. You'll find the iron down here at the entrance, or deeper down the underschool. The schedule menu is also capable of putting up schedules for singular people. So, for example, you can here add a custom schedule for specific people. So if you have somebody who needs a special treatment, this is the way to do this. This is very, very useful. Sometimes your mages grow very eccentric. You know, that's what mages do. And therefore, these are tools to configure those eccentric urges better. Same goes for the meals tab. Here we can configure who's eating what. Sometimes, for example, people start to hate a specific food. You can disallow them from eating it here. This is very handy because they will get a really big hit into their conviction if they are forced to eat something they hate. This is quite useful as well. You can even go as far as creating new groups. Here in this menu, we can create new groups and add all manner of wacky rules. This is really, really complex stuff, and probably I'll do a separate video one day about it. But technically, I just want to say that in this menu, you can define that all people that hate earth magic are going to get a specific schedule priority list applied, which excludes them from earth magic or stuff like that. This is what groups are for. Rarely used, but when you need it, it's very useful. Now, we are not going to end here. We can also do other fancy things. What's very important in the long run is to know that you can allow or disallow access to specific things in this game. So when we build a bed or a door or whatever, we can click it and get to the access menu. Here we get now to configure who gets to use this thing or doesn't. The standard setup is pretty much everywhere usage free for all, goes for beds and such, but here you already notice we have here a difference at the beds. What's loud? And this bed is already assigned to Estelle. When somebody picks a bed, automatically, which is only allowed when this checkmark is in, they keep that bed. Sometimes your students all of a sudden decide that they love to be in the same room with somebody at night, and this is something which you can here configure to make sure that they don't get a conviction penalty because they slept not together in a room. This is one of the very, very important things. It also allows you to configure certain rooms that they only get filled with students or staff, as you see there, all apprentices, all initiates, or the group that we just configured. Several configurations are possible, and this is very, very handy to make sure that the people land where they need to land, because it can really be quite devastating to the mood of people, and this is yet another tool. Works for dining tables and pretty much every item which people interact with. So the enchantophone has the same thing at the end of the day, and this is even true for crafting benches. So these are fine-tuning tools to make sure that only certain people land at a certain spot. You won't always need these tools, but I personally think it is very handy to know about them. Also goes for containers. Here in containers, we can configure what's going to be allowed to be in there and how many of them of those stacks can be stored in there. Each container has a maximum amount of stacks that can be stored in there. So the standard configuration is very broad and blunt. If you place down a container, it just accepts about anything and everything, which means people will just pick up stuff and carry it down here. For starters, it's okay to just lump up a bajillion of chests and call it a day with that. But eventually, when you have, for example, a pantry for your kitchen, you can use this to configure that certain ingredients land only there. But if the ingredients are now allowed up here and down here, you will end up with a situation that you want to control that the ingredients are first landing here and the excess goes downstairs. This is achieved by making priorities here. So if I would now put a chest up here and give it priority 4, my people would first fill the chest up there and then the chest down there because of the priorities. With these priorities, you can configure how stockpiles are being filled. For example, if you have a room where you store food for your next to your dining hall, this could be a priority 5. This would mean that everything cooked in the kitchen gets transported up there so people can eat it. And if ever the container up there is full, people will carry the rest to some other free container. These things can be super handy to configure your stockpiling and make sure that, people have short ways with everything. Because that is, at the end of the day, a very, very handy and useful thing. And for the end of today's video, I want to point towards the Death's Domain research here, because quilting. So at this point here, you gain access to worker golems, so to speak. Carriers first, and cleaners. These two guys are really, really good because every menial task that you can outsource to these folks means that your students and your teachers have more time to practice magic. And that is more time to grind XP, more time to grow stronger, even faster. So these guys are really, really good for organizing your stuff. And once you are a higher tier, you can even get yourself quilted that can mine, chop trees, even repair, and go even for the wounded and harvest stuff for you. This is really useful stuff which makes your school run much, much better. So I think now, at least to my personal understanding, you know the utmostly important tools to keep your school organized. All of these things can be applied many different ways. It's up to you what you want to do with it and how you want to work with it. I just wanted to give you the keys to get your school organized well. And a last word of advice, do things organically. Don't try to over-organize if it doesn't sit well to you, only because you feel like you should do. Never change a running system, and you can always optimize along the way and change things accordingly. I hope this helps you out, and yeah, feel free to add any comments in there below. Feel free to leave a like, leave a subscribe, and like I said, playlist link is down below. Many thanks to the supporters of Icon Gaming. Join on in if you want to via the given links downstairs below, and of course, many thanks for watching this video. I hope you have a great day. Bye bye.